evening, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Mike Crabtree. I'm a solution consultant for Micro Focus, and I focus on our IT operations management tools. And I'm with my dear friend and colleague, Pamela. Pamela, could you just introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Mike. My name is Pamela Asamoah, and I'm also a solution architect here at Micro Focus. But I did come here from CA Technologies, now Broadcom. And while I was there for about 17 years, I supported their enterprise service management solution, as well as the CA CMDB. And then in my transition to HPE/Micro Focus, I've continued to support similar products as well.
Okay, that's perfect. And I've come from different companies and backgrounds. I used to do IBM Tivoli and various other products in the operations management space. But it sounds like we both work around that sort of common ground of what the configuration management database is and how that gets used by other parts of the organization. Yeah. So one of the things I really wanted to go through, and it's something our customers are asking a lot, is what are the sort of top 3 ways that IT organizations can leverage all of that configuration information that many of them have collected. They've collected lots of data, but they're really trying to understand how to best utilize that around other parts of the organization, primarily things like their asset management group. So if we can actually sort of define those top 3 ways, that'd be really good in this session. But I think we need to start off with some definitions of some of these things. So could you kind of explain what you believe a configuration item is for our audience?
So when we look at configuration items, I like to use the analogy of your silverware drawer or your cutlery drawer, where you have your forks and you have your knives, you have your fish forks, you have your teaspoons, and all that. So those are all configuration items. When we take it a step into the technical area, you would define a CI or configuration item as an entity or a thing that you wish to track. That is also required for the delivery of a service. And then I'll go back to maybe even your garage and your tools in the garage, right? Each of those tools have a purpose. You have your hammer to nail something down. You have your drill bit to screw something in. And so that's what a CI is in layman's terms.
Okay, so if I could give an example that's sort of more IT focused, yeah, I look at things like a quad Ethernet card, and a quad Ethernet card is a piece of hardware that goes into a high-end enterprise class server. It's got a lot of cost to it. It has to be enterprise class with the components that make it up. So, is that a configuration item or is that really an asset?
It can be both. Because
okay, that's probably where the confusion starts to come in. So
let's define an asset, and then once we define an asset, we can take a look at that quad Ethernet card again.
Okay,
right?
Perfect.
So when we look at an asset is something that has a value to a person or an enterprise, and it usually has some kind of lifespan. You have a car, you purchase it, you bring it home, you use it for different purposes. A car also offers a service, of course, but it has a lifespan. At some point, you dispose of that car or you trade it in and you may get a new one or just dispose of it. So that's the difference. So a quad Ethernet card, even though it's an asset, you track which vendor you bought it from or how much you paid for it, it connects to your network that supports a service. So this is why I say that it can be both.
So I guess an asset, as soon as you actually purchase it, it remains an asset until you actually get rid of it out of the back door of the data center, because it has got some value, it's got some support contracts against it, those kind of things. But it's only when you put it inside a machine and then you configure it to have an IP address and a MAC address, those kind of things, and maybe it's got Ethernet port bonding and those kind of things. That's really when it becomes a configuration item.
Yes.
Is that right? Okay.
That's right.
All right. So so that's really down at the depths of a server. That's sort of some of the lowest components. But as an IT group, many people are actually looking at, well, how do we provide a service to my end users? And those could be internal to the organization as well as external. But the IT group's really focused on that service delivery. Where should they be focusing then? And should they be focusing on the CIs or on the assets?
These IT groups, depending on where you fall, should be, if you ask me, and based on my experience, should be focusing on three main areas so that they can get the most benefit or the most value out of their CMDBs. They should be focusing on using these CIs to build service models so that they know what business services they offer, who they offer it to, right? And what value they bring to the organization. They should also be using the assets to understand the software licensing, project costs, asset life cycle, support and maintenance contracts as well. And then last but not the least, the third point is that linking knowledge, events, your performance information, your availability, and then security across both assets and CIs to support your services.
Okay, so we've really got those three areas. So the building the service models and understanding how configuration items are used, really understanding the value of those assets, as you say, through software licensing, project costs. It then becomes, as you're suggesting, really about linking the asset information as well as the configuration item information. They're really one and the same thing, but they're just views from different people by the sounds of it and how they're actually used. So what if we start to delve into those three items, and let's try and understand particularly things like the service models. So who would use the service models that you would create inside a configuration management database?
So this is where, should I say, if you looked at a CMDB today, you'd be like, oh my, this has millions of things in there. Yes, millions of things. Should I say overwhelming information?
Right.
But overwhelming information, but this is where you start to look at the point of view. So you just asked me that who would use these service models. When I look at my service, when I talk about service models, I start to look at my change manager. I look at my incident manager, my problem manager, and then my configuration manager. These four groups of people need to look at this information from a point of view where if an end user calls and says, email is not working, I need to be able to drill down into the email service and see which component of the email service is not working. Is it the database? Is it a network issue? When I look at this same service model from a problem manager's point of view, this problem manager has a flood of incidents coming in, again, associated with email, just as an example. And when he or she looks at this service, these incidents, they say, well, where are they coming from? And then who is it impacting? And how are they reoccurring? And is it always associated with the database, or are 5 of them associated with the network and then the remaining 2 associated with a database issue? So with problem management, root cause analysis, this is critical. Having that view for root cause analysis and reducing mean time to repair is very important. The next persona is my change manager. So for my change manager, the problem management team have identified the root cause, and they know what the problem is. They fix it and say, here, go implement it. So from a change manager's point of view, on the day of my implementation, I need to know who and what is going to be impacted when that database comes down, or if we need to upgrade that operating system, and we bring down that server, which other applications will be impacted? So that will be their use, or even having the ability to see the critical path by focusing on that database and seeing everything else that it's connected to. That's a beautiful service model.
Okay.
And then for my configuration manager, I never want to forget about my configuration manager, because the configuration manager typically owns the CMDB. However, from their point of view, if a change manager or a problem manager comes and says, no, this server does not support my application, or that database does not support my application, or it's outdated and we need to upgrade it, or we need to change the server, that's the configuration manager's role to make sure that, number one, it's configured correctly, and number two, it's introduced to the environment in a way that meets what the baseline of that service model should be. So that's it from like who the point of view and how the information in the CMDB can be used when you're creating your service model, who needs it and what their point of view should be. And that's critical when you're going to set up a CMDB.
Right. Okay. So that sounds like it's the operations team that really need to focus on those configuration items, but particularly how they link together to make that service model. It sounds like just collecting the data is one thing, but actually building it into a service model is really where the power comes out of that. But what about for the asset management side, the project costs and the PC lifecycle and support and maintenance? What value really is that from a CMDB perspective, and how it affects the asset management side?
From that point of view, a lot of organizations today will have an asset management solution or an asset management database, and it's just a database until you can analyze that information. How do you analyze that information or make it meaningful? By creating that point of view. So when we talk about using the asset to understand software licensing, the life cycle of your assets, and support and maintenance contracts, you're looking at the asset management team, which includes the procurement team, who would create a service catalog of the assets that you've purchased, and whether it's software or hardware, and put a process around it so that people can request it in the appropriate way. And once it's requested and it's deployed, it's included in your configuration management database. And when it's time for you to renegotiate contracts, when your contract times are up, you have all this information that's stored that you can leverage. When you deploy software, you know what you have purchased versus what you've deployed, because all of this is captured in that CMDB. But as an asset manager or a vendor manager or a procurement manager, I have this view that all I see is what is meaningful for me when I have to do my job.
Okay, so we've got sort of two different viewpoints on how you use this information. One seems to be that using the CIs to build those service models. That's really the first point we're trying to get across. The second one is really understanding the financial aspects of your business, and that's how you do that through the asset management side. Although they could be talking about that same quad Ethernet card, it's different views of information around that same thing. So, but you also mentioned earlier on about the benefit of linking the knowledge that you've got, the events, performance, the reliability, and security across both those CIs and assets. But that must be a daunting task.
Absolutely. That is a nightmare for a lot of organizations, right? So recently, Forbes magazine published an article, and they mentioned that only 15% of these service asset and configuration management projects, meaning CMDB implementations, are successful. So why does anybody take this on? And I want to take a step back and come back to that linking information without forgetting about our operations team. What you'll find is this, should I say, ocean of information, again, that operations teams, they come in or they're sitting there and they have systems going down, systems going up, but they have no remediation steps. They have no visibility into these services. So by linking these events with performance information, with availability, and the CIs and the assets, everybody knows that system ABC is system ABC. Mike or the asset management team doesn't call it XYZ, and then the configuration manager calls it ABC. Each CI is the same across the board because you share that common repository.
I guess that's where people talk about a single source of truth, and that's really what you're trying to get to. Okay.
Yes. For my operations team, with that single pane of glass where they have an outage and they drill down on that CI, they know immediately that that CI supports that service because you have that service model available. You have that asset information available. Is it under maintenance? Is it down? Is it up? What remediation documents? What do we need to do when this server goes down? Who do we need to contact and who's impacted? Having this again for that operations team is critical to them.
We've talked about this earlier and said that just the complexity of just what you've described for a lot of organizations. A lot of people don't really get to that stage of truly understanding their CIs and the service model that they relate to, and about how those CIs affect their asset details and the financial aspects of what they're doing. So drawing from your personal experience, what have you actually seen at your customers, and how are they addressing this? Is there an easy way to get there?
There is an easy way to get there, but it depends on where you begin your journey. I've seen customers that never finish CMDB projects or because they find it overwhelming. Most people do, and it's common based on the research that I just mentioned by Forbes magazine. But it is doable. It is doable because of the value it brings to organizations, both tangible and intangible. Let's talk about where you begin. We talk about that single source of truth. That single source of truth is information that you bring in from different sources. A lot of people feel like everything has to be in that single database. So I'll go to organizations and I'll find that there's spreadsheets, there's different databases, there's all kinds of places that this information comes to, even in someone's head, tribal knowledge. People know.
That's probably the worst one, yes.
Yes.
Particularly when someone leaves the organization.
Yes. So that's we find that, and also I also see that asset management is always treated as a separate function, but asset management and configuration management should all be tied together. You get around it by having what we call federation. Federation means even though your information exists in certain places, use integrations, use APIs to bring all of this information into that single source of truth so that you're not having data integrity issues. You are not having, when you look at a service model, that is a single service model across the board for your organization so that the operations team doesn't have a different service model and then the change management team doesn't have a different service model. This is where the disaster begins.
Right. Okay. So we've really gone through three different areas. So we talked about using the CIs for building the service models. We talked about using the assets to understand your software licensing, your project costs for your PC life cycle, understanding the support and maintenance, and how those all link together then using that knowledge you've got of both the configuration items and the assets, but how that affects things like your security and your reliability. But as we said, it's people don't always start off in the right way. There's lots of information in lots of different places, and they really need that integrated one single source of truth kind of solution. Yeah. So what's your recommendation on that good place to start then?
So because this data is coming from all different kinds of places, you'll find that a lot of your challenges would be around like data integrity, right? Because now you're bringing information from different places and you need to, reconcile your data. A great way to avoid this will be to select solutions. I really don't like to talk about tools because your first option is to find out where all of this data is and then how you're going to bring it together. You're going to need tools, you're going to need APIs, but based on my experience in the industry, I would say that you need an excellent reconciliation engine. And a reconciliation engine that will not create duplicate CIs or update certain attributes of a CI and leave others out. And also discovery tools that support a hybrid infrastructure. We all know that not all organizations have applications that are on premise. Some are in the cloud. Some are applications that you subscribe to. You have development teams that need to bring up servers for a period of time to do their work. And after that period, they deprovision them. Your CMDB, your discovery engine needs to be able to capture this and put it in your CMDB. So
interesting, sorry, just to stop you there, but it's interesting. I've got some customers at the moment that are actually looking at the hybrid infrastructure where things are changing much more rapidly than they've ever been before. So when customers have had configuration items in a spreadsheet, and they struggled even with the traditional data centers that tend to be fairly static. But obviously now in this hybrid infrastructure, and new virtual machines can be created one day and they've gone the next, it's very difficult for them to keep track. So it's important what you're saying about all these different areas and the right discovery tools.
Yes, I always say, how are you going to reconcile all of this data? It's important. You're especially for the mature organizations, the organizations that have been around for 20, 30 years, they have a lot of data that they need to bring together. So your first question is, how are you going to reconcile all of these? And then how are you going to discover the new items that are coming in? And because you have a hybrid infrastructure, how are you going to bring that in too? So the key thing about this is to provide accurate and up-to-date information and share that collected data with your event team, your service management team, and also your asset management teams. And the way to do that is to have that reconciliation engine and an excellent discovery tool.
Okay.
And somebody that actually understands your business.
Right, yes. And that whole thing around service models, I think, would be a good topic for another conversation. But we probably need to wrap up at this stage. So if I can just sort of summarize what I've heard from you, because it's really valuable information that you're providing to us here. So it looks like there is a very clear distinction between a configuration item and an asset. And your success on using those depends on who needs the information and how it is used, yeah? So for instance, our tool Microfocus SMAX is one of the strongest solutions in the market that provides that distinction and really works truly well with its the configuration management database that we have. So really that helps you to then really look at the three key areas that we've been talking about today. So using those configuration items for building your service models, using that asset information to understand your software licensing, your project cost and your PC lifecycle, your support and maintenance contracts, but then looking at how all of that data that you've collected, when you link it all together around your events, your performance, your reliability, and your security, really affects everything to do with your configuration items and your assets. So, okay, any final comments, Pamela, before we do finally wrap up?
Thank you very much for your time today, and I'm looking forward to our next podcast. Maybe we can delve a little bit deeper into service models and how they're introduced into an organization from scratch, meaning if you were building an application, a new application versus you didn't have a service model at all and you needed to build one. So That's an area that I think would be worth exploring on our next podcast.
Yeah, and I've got some customers that I think would be very interested in that topic. It's quite an important one to get right. Okay, thank you very much for your time, Pamela. So this is the end of the podcast from Pamela and myself. Thank you very much for your time, everyone.